Patty. I'm from the London Abused Women's Centre. And I recognize that not all of you are in London. In fact, most of you may not be in London. So I am going to be talking about some community referrals that might be available more on a provincial level, more in your area. So it's not just going to be all about London, just so if anybody's concerned about that. So again, you have an overview of the services that we provide here. So we provide services to women and girls who are 12 years of age and older, who've been abused by an intimate partner. That could be a boyfriend, a common law partner. It could be a woman in a lesbian relationship. It could be a dating relationship. So anytime there's that intimate relationship, women who've been sexually assaulted, sexually exploited, or sex trafficked, or subjected to non-state torture through their experiences of abuse or trafficking. Sorry, just the PowerPoint is always a little trickier to navigate. Our services are free, long-term, women's center and trauma informed. We're not a shelter. We're not crisis. We're non-residential. So I am going to provide you with some information about what to do if there is a crisis. We do offer immediate access to services. We have an advocate counselor here who is available every single afternoon to provide services to women who are waiting for an intake and just can't wait that long. Even if it's a 2-week, they need something in the immediacy. They can't wait for their regular client appointment. Or sometimes we offer services to community partners who are saying, this is a situation, I don't know where to turn to in the community. I don't know what to do. How can you help me? What information and resources are available? Everything that we do has a key focus on safety planning. And that safety planning could be around incidents of physical sexual violence, but it's also that emotional safety plan. When I meet with a woman, I provide a safety plan every single time I meet. And that's even if I have 20 appointments with somebody, there's going to be some focus on some element of safety for her. I am going to give you just our definition of, when I talk about abuse, what it is that I'm talking about. So abuse for the London Abused Women's Centre, and you're going to find, you can go online and you're going to get different ideas. This one here is got kind of an overview. I guess it's the intentional and systematic use of tactics to establish and maintain power and control over the thoughts, beliefs, and conduct of a woman. Intentional. I think most of us, when we think intentional, we think on purpose. And yes, abuse is intentional. Abuse is on purpose. That doesn't mean that an abuser is sitting there plotting, what am I going to do to hurt her next? It can be, but chances are, if we think intentional, I think of how many times a woman says, please stop. That scares me. That hurts me. How many times a woman cries? How many times a woman cringes, tries to protect her body? How many times a woman tries to flee something? And the abuse continues. That's intentional because that person knows, that abuser knows this isn't all right. This is hurtful. This is painful, and continues the behavior. Systematic, again and again. When we talk of tactics, I think of a lot of times, if I was to ask everyone here what their definition of abuse was, people would say physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, definitely. But it's also financial, using social status, weaponizing custody and access, so using your children, isolation, threats. There's a term called coercive control that people talk about that seems to be more of a new language. The language of the London Abused Women's Centre is rooted in what's called a power and control wheel. If anybody's interested, we do have that on our website, but you can do research and just look up the power and control wheel, and different versions will come up. No matter what the tactic is, whether it is denying that the abuser, denying that they said it, denying that they did it, trying to minimize it so it goes away, blaming the woman for their actions, no matter what tactic is used, what it does is it's having control over the thoughts, beliefs, and conduct of a woman, telling a woman where she could go, who she can see, what she can do, but it filters down into what her belief system is about herself. And her internalizing that message of abuse, chances are that she's not worthy, that she's not enough, that she has no value. So if you're coming from that position, and I'm just going back to what Anne said about that scenario, you have a woman, and quite often an immigrant woman might come, or a newcomer might come, a refugee woman might come, and not even be able to fully understand what her experience of abuse is. So it's hard enough for, one of my favorite quotes, I did a training, and the favorite quote is, domestic violence is the only crime where the victim needs to be educated as to why it's a crime. A lot of times women can say the abuse is over, so I'm safe, I'm okay. And they don't understand that there are so many impacts to that abuse that have, if they're without counseling, are really challenging to resolve. You know, fight, flight, freeze responses, what it does to your nervous system, about those internalized belief systems about yourself. Those are the impacts of that abuse. And without some support, women continue to live with those impacts. And then they chances are struggle so much for the rest of their life. My favorite quote, women are beaten down long before they're beaten up. That's awful that that's my favorite quote, but I really do. Abuse is such a process. Chances are the first time a woman is subjected to abuse, it's not a physical assault. So it's that process of being worn down again and again and again until you lose yourself. When we think, when I tried to gear this a little bit more to what is the difference for a refugee woman coming to Canada, there's not a lot of differences in all honesty, other than some of the lack of awareness of systems, those kinds of things that any newcomer is going to face. Women are often very, very surprised. And I am going to explain that statement a little bit further. Women are very surprised that women in Canada are also abused. They think that this doesn't happen to Canadian women, but abuse is any woman's experience. And chances are, if a woman, immigrant woman, a refugee woman comes to Canada and she's experiencing abuse here, she was experiencing abuse at her country of origin. The thing is, at her country of origin, it could have been considered normal. It could have been considered a cultural practice, and was probably a generational cycle that was happening. So again, it goes that no matter who you are, no matter where you are from as a woman, it is so challenging to understand your experience of abuse. Because part of that tactic, part of that experience of abuse is being told that you are the problem again and again and again. And if I am the problem, if I'm the one who's creating all of this, then I'm actually not being abused because I'm responsible for what happened to me, which is actually the abuse in action. You're going to find a lot of newcomer refugee women don't even call their experience abuse. So just some language to look for, to be aware of, is she might consider her life just really hard. You might find that she's not allowed to go anywhere without her partner, that she turns to her partner for all decision making, that kind of thing. But if she's going to identify, she's not going to say, yes, he's abusive towards me. She's going to say, yeah, just things are really, really hard. She may not feel unsafe with him, which might sound a little bit strange. Again, it goes back to, though, that she's conditioned to believe that abuse is normal. And if it was normal in her country of origin, then she's going to just, that's going to carry over here, or that's just how things are, and that's just what people do in relationships. So again, it's going to become normalized. Sorry, this is a screen that doesn't want to show the buttons. There we go. So what happens when you come to Canada is, in your country of origin, the abuse may not have been as hidden as it's going to be in Canada. And I think that's what a lot of times people don't recognize, that Canadian women are abused as well, because it happens in homes in Canada. In a country of origin, quite often, well, I don't want to generalize, but sometimes that abuse is because it is so normalized. It will happen in public. A woman could be demeaned in public. There could be a physical assault in public, and there are no consequences for that behavior. If that was to happen here in Canada, or there's abuse on the street, if a partner started yelling and screaming at a woman on the street, police are going to get called. There's going to be a neighbor who sees it. There's going to be, it's going to happen in an apartment building, and neighbors are going to hear it. If it happens in a store, storekeepers are going to see it, and they're going to intervene, and there's going to be consequences for an abuser. So what happens quite often is those practices are what at one time might have been more just open and accepted, here in Canada are going to become even more hidden. They're going to be more so hidden in that home. And then what happens is you're going to have an abuser also. Sometimes when women come to Canada, abusers quite often perceive that they are losing power, because as a woman gets connected to community supports, as a woman, and just gave as an example here, she might receive the child tax credit. So she's now going to have monies that are going to come in her name that he doesn't have access to. So he's going to perceive that he's losing power and control. And there's a real likelihood that he's going to escalate, intensify his tactics of power and control, so that he goes back to the status quo where he has more power and more control over her. So you might find for some women that the more it's so key that she builds support systems, that the family builds support systems and builds internal and external resources. That's also, if you're dealing with an abuser, is going to intensify potentially the abuse. So just something that you need to be aware of. So anyone coming to a new country's got lots and lots of barriers to face. Language barriers to cultural differences, acclimatizing to a new country and new systems. I think even acclimatizing to weather. Like there's so much to get used to. Um, there's things to consider that I want you to consider with specific to abuse that an immigrant refugee woman faces that you may not anticipate. So she's lost her support system potentially in her. So if she speaks out about the abuse that she experiences here in Canada, she risks losing her support system here in Canada, but also at home. So if she speaks out and she says that this is what's happening to me, then there is ripple impacts back in her country of origin potentially that silence her here. So, for example, we support women who have come and said, if I do anything, if I leave him, if I try and file for divorce, if I speak out about this, he's threatened to kill my family back home. And when you come from a country where you've seen that happen, then it's very silencing here. So it's something to really consider that it's not just about safety here, that women who are from another country have other things that they're navigating that we may not understand. The other part is there are different cultural practices between here and home that when you change your cultural practices, you lose that support again because people don't understand, people judge your family. I supported a woman who was married through an arranged marriage and wanted to leave here, but it was had to be negotiated between both of the families back home. And she was so concerned that her family back home would be shamed that it really was almost immobilizing for her. Right? The other thing that can happen is I did a presentation for a group of students of newcomer students that were going into the medical field. And one woman said, if I speak out, then I lose my cultural community here in Canada. That means I'm all alone. And that fear of loneliness, that isolation, because abuse happens in isolation so frequently. The loss of a support system is so key when you're supporting an immigrant newcomer woman, that a refugee woman, because if she's disconnected and doesn't have access to her community back home, and then she loses her community here, then she's really lost. And it's an additional how scary that would be. There's so much fear that's attached to this experience. There's shame that's attached to this experience. Fear of being deported because an abuser is going to use and weaponize whatever system is available to them to continue to perpetuate their power and control. So they're going to threaten a woman to have her deported if she speaks up or she tries to leave. They're going to say that the government's not going to let you stay in Canada without me. They're going to say the government's going to take your children from you because maybe he's the one who's working now and she's not. And he's going to use those systems to say, I have more money than you, so you're going to lose custody of your children if you don't comply with my expectations. So there's going to be different levels of fear, and then the not understanding those systems and not knowing where to turn to for help and support adds a whole other layer to the experience when you're a woman who's being subjected to abuse, and those additional amplified barriers when you're a newcomer or a refugee woman. Then it's how do you help? So I typed all this, and I'm really going to, there's a few things that I really want to be really focus on. Refer. Connect to resources as best you can. That's going to be my first suggestion. You know, there is understanding and valuing and validating her cultural and religious norms. You never dismiss that. It's talking about here in Canada, this is how we do things. This is how things are. And I was saying that, and then I think to myself that how many women in Canada are also subjected to abuse. So you can say, you know, here in Canada, we have laws and legislation. Here in Canada, this is what's considered abuse. I would suggest that you do that, but refer if you're not sure of how to have the conversation. Talk to somebody in your community if you're not sure of how to have the conversation with her. So when we talk about referral, it's referring, we do what we'd call a warm transfer. So It's not just about me giving a phone number to a woman and say, here, they'll help you here. It's about sitting with someone and saying, can I help you make the phone call? Can I go with you to the appointment so that you're not so alone? Those are really, really key important things that any woman who's being subjected to abuse is provided with counseling. And I'm going to talk about where in your community you can access that potentially. With the counseling, we think about counseling. When I think of counseling, I think of safety planning. I think of understanding impacts of the abuse. I think about educating women as to what abuse actually is, how it is, the nuances of that, how that is in action, what that really looks like. Again, safety planning on different levels, connecting to community supports, legal supports, educational options, systems navigation. There's an awful lot to know through all of this, and none of us knows it all. So it's about, again, connecting to as many resources as possible. I don't necessarily suggest that you try and talk to an abuser. Quite often that's our intention, is to, go to an abuser and say, here we don't do that, or it's not okay that you treat a woman that way. Chances are that an abuser, there's going to be some people that just may not understand that the difference, but there's going to be an abuser is going to put on a social mask to you. An abuser is going to put on the mask that I didn't know that. I'm so sorry. Make promises to change. They're going to, again, put that mask of who they are out in society, but behind closed doors, the woman's going to get punished. So addressing something with a man, an abuser, can sometimes escalate the abuse that she's being subjected to. So just to bear that in mind, that if there's going to be intervention with him, my suggestion that it happens when they are no longer residing together. Breaking the isolation is another thing when you think about how to help. Breaking isolation, providing support, and creating and building a larger and more diverse community. So having a cultural community to me is so important. I think there's a safety in a cultural community, but when you're a woman subjected to abuse, that safety doesn't always exist, right? That fear of judgment is there. That safety doesn't always exist for her. That building a diverse community is about establishing a full and well-rounded life here in Canada. It's about, is there a community of faith that she is interested in taking part in? Has she ever wanted to take an art class? Has she ever wanted, is she interested in education and employment? Building those resources and building those supports for her and her family are very key. So just a little bit about the London Abused Women Centre. We are a bit of a unicorn. So there are not many agencies like the London Abused Women Centre. There are agencies who have pockets of what we do, but most communities are not going to have someone quite like us. I just want to be really clear about, but there are lots of agencies where women can access free counseling for when you're subjected to intimate partner violence. I came from London, from North Bay, so we had a community counseling center. Community counseling centers typically have free services for women who are subjected to abuse. Here we utilize what's called across languages for interpretation services. And because it's linked to the abuse, those interpretation services are free. A lot of agencies that are supporting women who are subjected to abuse have access to free interpretation services. Each community, that's different for each community, but it is there. And so if I have a client who comes in and she can speak English, if English is not her first language, I'm still going, and she speaks English quite well, I'm still going to offer her interpretation services. When you are speaking about something so hard and so personal and emotional, sometimes you need to express that in your own language, the language of your heart. So that is services, I would offer that to anyone, even if the person is relatively comfortable in English.
Hi,
So,
Patty. I'm just interrupting as far as a time check here.
okay. So two things. I've provided information of how you can find a shelter in your community. Shelters you don't have to live at a shelter to receive shelter services, just so you are aware. And I know I'm just about out of time. That's the key one. So sheltersafe.ca/Ontario. There are different programs in community. The Assaulted Women's Helpline, if anybody is really interested, this offers services in 200 languages for women who are subjected to abuse and don't know which way to turn. They're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Um, there is programming for abusers. I don't know if you have access to this presentation. If anyone has a further question about that at the end, then I'm happy to provide that. This, I guess, is the one that I would really want you to have, is the Assaulted Women's Helpline. Again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These ones here are more specific. This one is specific to Toronto, for legal supports for women who also have the intersectionality of immigration issues. So the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic, they will offer services outside of Toronto, but that's more specific to legal supports. And if you're helping someone phone 911, they, as long as they are able to speak their, say their language in English, that's all they need to do to be able to access interpretation through 911. So I'm sorry that that's so rushed, but I thank you so much for your time.
It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks very much for uh, setting the stage with the sponsorship journey that you had. And uh, Patty, there's going to be a lot of similarity in some of the things that you have covered, and what I have to cover. I will mention the slides are full of information. I'm going to go through some fairly quickly due to time limits, but I wanted to give sponsors all of the information to be able to take away, and should they wish or need to refer to in the future. So, Muslim Children's Aid and Support Services is a social services and child welfare agency. We're not a legislative body like CAS, that we provide support and advocate for families who have complex needs or are engaged with CAS. We also provide case management, system referral services, and a variety of programs and services, all free to the pan-Muslim community and also to non-Muslims. So it was very helpful when initial discussions were had back in the spring about this workshop, that Gail provided me with three leading questions, and will govern the flow of the presentation. So what do sponsors need to know about potential child welfare issues? Well, as Patty has really covered, families are experiencing a number of challenges and have a number of needs as individuals and as the family unit. So they're dealing with everything that is wrapped around migration and resettlement. There's drastic environmental changes where really we know they have left almost everyone and everything that they know and love behind in their home country, and are adapting to a totally different environment. So so that environment, as much as we like to think and believe in Canada, is not always a safe environment. So there may be um, challenges in the community and in the schools, and through daily life as families really navigate their new life in Canada. Um, there's been a lot of conversation in all corners of society since October 7th of 2023, and so a really alarming rise in bullying, discrimination, racism, and Islamophobia that is experienced by children and parents. And also there's often intergenerational tensions and conflict as children and parents try to navigate this new world and straddle the so-called old world and Canadian society. Patty's also really mentioned, language barriers, and we also see, academic and psychosocial challenges in children's adaptation to brand new school environment. In the area of health, we know that there are numerous physical and mental health challenges. There's often a lack of understanding about trauma and how trauma will manifest itself. As Patty has covered so well, there's so much to consider around relationships between parents as well. Families, although maybe not so much during the sponsorship period, but they may still deal with food insecurity, with underhousing, and a lack of culturally integrated services. And we also see, as Anne has mentioned, CES investigations may come up during the sponsorship period. A lot happening in the schools, and in the cases of some families, they may find themselves involved in law enforcement. And a lot of what we see is that when families become involved with one system, they become involved with another, which adds to the complexity and how to help and support and advocate for the families. So just a little bit, and I'm going to go through this quickly about the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act. So this is the act in Ontario that governs child welfare and child protection, and we all have a duty to protect children. And the law gives the society the responsibility to investigate any concerns of abuse or neglect. And it also requires that anyone who believes there is a potential issue of abuse or neglect, it has the duty to report that for children under the age of 16. For children who are 16 to and 17, that duty is optional. I'm going to skip over the poll question. So essentially, the law defines that a child is in need of protection if uh, they have suffered abuse or neglect, or maybe at risk of suffering abuse and neglect. And in the next few slides, so I'm just going to very briefly go over the areas that the law covers, because it's a very, very, very broad spectrum, and some may not immediately be thought of as potential abuse or neglect. I think this is the poll question we have, Gail. Is that correct?
Yes, just give me a moment and I'll launch the poll. Second. So we have about half respondents. I'll just give them another minute or two. Okay, and I'll just end the poll.
So perhaps we can discuss the
So
results of the poll in the Q&A if there's an interest in doing so. So I can't see the results from here.
Oh, okay. So, okay, I'll read out the results. Sorry. So for where do the most calls to CAS originate from? Community members, 33% said that. Medical professionals, 7%. Schools, 53%, and law enforcement, 7%. So the highest percent, 53, said schools, and then community members.
And that is in fact the case, that the largest number of calls come from schools. Of course, it varies somewhat between region to region, but as a generalization, that is where most of the calls come from. So how can sponsors recognize potential abuse or neglect? So there are a number of areas that CAS considers. So the first one being physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and this is one that often has cultural connotations. One of the reasons that was an imperative for the founding of MCAS in 2004 was the experiences of some of the families in the child welfare system, and what was seen on several occasions was around food, and how lunches were provided or not provided in the community. It was often that they would have hot lunches back home, and this was the tradition that they carried here. And at times when those hot lunches did not appear at school for the children, it would prompt educators to connect with CAS. Patty has discussed intimate partner violence at length, and this is something that the society will really take very very seriously, what the child is exposed to in the home. And unfortunately, on the rise, both in the community and online, is child trafficking. And so it really is a number of areas that we have to consider when we think of potential abuse or neglect. So how can sponsors handle issues or help the family to handle issues? So I think one of the first things to really keep in mind is what happens when you call CAS. So you will speak with an intake worker who will then take information from you. You can report anonymously, and the society has the requirement to investigate all calls that they receive of alleged abuse or neglect. So the worker who's assigned to the case will assess the information provided, may do some preliminary investigation, and if they deem that the allegations may have some substance will then connect with the family and work with the family with the goal of supporting the children and ensuring that that there's no harm being done to the children. So CAS is available 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, and we all, as adults in the province of Ontario, have the duty to report. So things for us to consider as sponsors, and Patty has covered this in relation to intimate partner violence, and there's really a lot of similarities. So we need to be culturally aware, culturally humble, and culturally sensitive, and really recognize that and be respectful of the family's beliefs and traditions, that they have all come from collectivist societies that are very, very different from our westernized society, and they are trying to navigate two different worlds, keeping their traditions and their values and figuring out how that all fits in. And there will be some beliefs that are, and it's referred to tied beliefs, that are really fundamental to who they are as individuals and who they are as a family. And particular when those tied beliefs come into potential issues of abuse or neglect, those conversations and the way to navigate that successfully is very challenging, and it's really important to be compassionate and empathetic, and and put put yourself in the family's shoes and in the children's shoes. I had a few years ago an encounter with a worker, and she said at the end of the visit we were involved in, um, it's my role to keep the children safe and protect the children. And it just jarred me. And I was compelled to say to her, but when you look at the mother here, the refugee mother here, she's kept her children safe in a war zone. She's kept her children safe in a refugee camp. And she has got her children safely here to Canada to start a new life. So, who is it really that has protected the children? So we really have to, in a non-judgmental, empathetic way, think about the whole construct of what's happening.
Karen, it's David doing a time check here.
Oh dear. Okay,
Have
I'm
a
gonna
couple
have
of minutes.
oh dear, I'm gonna have to speed through here. So maybe so the second thing really to keep in mind is not to assume the role of the parents, to really give the parents agency over the rearing of their children, to support them, to provide resources to help them to become self-sufficient, and really keep all of the needs of the family, the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of the family in mind. Um, the next thing to consider is that all family situations are complex, and to really to strive to maintain trust with the family, keep in mind that they have endured significant trauma, and support children and parents to work through challenges, and how really collectively to meet short term and long term needs, and engage community supports when desired and needed. The next thing really to keep in mind, and there's been a lot of media coverage in the last couple of years, is there really is an imbalance of power here. That it's well documented. There's an overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous children in CAS, and emerging research is pointing in the direction that this may also apply to Arab families. Our families are not going to understand what the laws are, what rights they have, how to exercise those rights, because they don't have anything like CAS back in their homelands. There's also the impact on children and parents, and if children are taken into foster care, then that produces a whole new level of isolation and a loss of identities, and families being torn apart. Families did not come to Canada to be separated, and there's often long-term trauma even after a CAS investigation is closed. And this is a little more about thinking about mental health and trauma as we're supporting and advocating for the family, and that decisions can really have long-term impact, or change the family forever. This is particularly true if children are taken into foster care. I had one situation with a family where two young children were taken into foster care on the eve of Eid. And I think we can all put ourselves in that situation, uh, and think of how the family um, and the children would have responded to that. Um, and closing up here, so really, what can sponsors do to protect the family and navigate the child welfare system? So really, it's to understand what the rights of CAS are, and they are extensive. They're encapsulated here on the slide, but CAS does have the right to apprehend children, or in words of the society, take them to a place of safety without a court order. They also do not need a warrant to enter a family's home. Um, they have the right to see any area in the family's home, and the right to speak with other professionals as they go about their investigation, and also the right to interview children, including young children, without the presence of parents. Um, Key takeaways, really. We should all think about our own biases, stereotypes, experiences, and the role that they may play in how we deal with uh, situations where there are children's issues and family issues, and really support the family in a non-judgmental way. We also need to keep in mind that every worker will deal with a family situation differently, and there are differences between the different children's aid societies in the different jurisdiction. So, really, if we as sponsors have witnessed a situation of alleged abuse or neglect, we really need to think about the relationship with the family and trust that has been built up, and support and advocate the family, and as Patty talked about a lot, look for resources to help the family, and also to collaborate with agencies like MCAS. In Peel region, there's an organization called Indus that provides wraparound services in London and Middlesex. It's the Muslim Resource Center, and in Toronto, Durham region, and across Ontario. We as MCAS provide that support and advocacy and services, and that's it. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to share some information with you today on the needs of children and families.
Okay, so I'll just do a bit of an introduction about ACTO. So we are the Advocacy Center for Tenants of Ontario. We are a specialty legal clinic with a provincial mandate to advance and protect the interests of low-income tenants. So we specialize in housing-related issues, and we try to advance tenant rights through legal services, law reform, public legal education, and community engagement. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have the Tenant Duty Council program, which is what Vicky and I do. So we're legal professionals, we're lawyers, and we provide summary legal advice, resources, and referrals to unrepresented tenants on or before the day of their hearing at the Landlord and Tenant Board. We try to prioritize tenants that are facing an eviction, but unfortunately there are limited services on the day of the hearing, so tenants are always advised to contact their legal clinic for more assistance. We also have the Low Income Energy Network, which is a joint program between ACTO and the Canadian Environmental Law Association. Their goal is to ensure that low-income people in Ontario have access to adequate and affordable energy. And then we also have the Your Way Forward project, which provides legal services, case management, and limited counseling to tenants that are experiencing housing issues due to gender-based violence, but referral is needed for those services. Next slide, please.
Okay, understanding your rights. So tenant rights don't exist just because a landlord is nice. They are legally protected. And where do these rights come from? They actually come from multiple overlapping legal sources in Ontario. The biggest one is the Residential Tenancies Act. This is the main law that governs most rental housing in Ontario. It covers rent rules, evictions, maintenance, landlord and tenant responsibilities, and it's enforced through the Landlord and Tenant Board. It does apply broadly, but there are some exceptions that the RTA doesn't apply to, such as if a tenant shares a kitchen or bathroom with their landlord. It doesn't cover seasonal or short-term temporary rentals, such as Airbnbs or like winter cottage rentals. It also doesn't cover institutional settings such as prisons, hospitals, shelters, or dormitories. The next big one is the Human Rights Code, so the HRC. The Landlord and Tenant Board has an obligation to consider HRC issues during a hearing where parties raise issues related to discrimination. Even if you aren't covered by the Residential Tenancies Act, so let's say you do share a bathroom or a kitchen with your landlord, the HRC still applies, and it prohibits landlords from discrimination based on race, gender, age, religion, disability, family status, and so forth. It also requires that landlords reasonably accommodate tenants where they need it. So this may be a tenant who needs a safety bar in their bathroom, and that has to be done at the cost of the landlord. It may be that the tenant needs a ramp up into their unit. Examples of discrimination would be if a landlord refused to rent to someone because they had children or they had needs like a service animal. And then next we have property standards, health, and safety. So most cities or municipalities will have bylaws that set minimum standards for rental units, and both tenants and landlords are required to follow these standards. And they include things like heating, noise, plumbing, mold, structural safety, pest control. It's often even faster to go through municipal bylaws than it is to go through the LTB, because the LTB can take months before your matter is heard. Whereas most cities, 311 can send someone out to have your unit inspected. The inspector can issue an order to the landlord. They can issue fines if the landlord doesn't, fix the mold or repair something or provide you with heating in winter. And all of that evidence you can also use in your LTB matter as well.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about tenant applications. So there's different kinds of tenant applications, but the main ones we have here are the T1. So that's for rent rebates, trying to get back money that the landlord owes. A T2, which is really important, that's about tenant rights. And that could be for a variety of reasons, things like harassment, illegal entry, illegal lockouts. You have the T3, which is about rent reductions, the T5, which is about a bad faith eviction. So basically the landlord lied to try to evict you, which is a common thing that we see in N12 and N13s, which we'll talk more about later on. And then there's the T6, and that's for maintenance issues like pests, mold, broken appliances. And oftentimes if you're filing a T6, you can also file a T2. And also based on this presentation today, we want to note that there is an N15 notice that tenants can file to end their tenancy if they're fearful of experiencing sexual or domestic violence and abuse. Next slide, please. Okay, so going more into depth about the T2. So some examples are the landlord has entered the unit illegally without notice. They changed the lock system and they didn't provide the tenants with a key. They seriously interfered with reasonable enjoyment of the rental property. They withheld or interfered with vital services, care services, or meals. They harassed, interfered, obstructed, coerced, or threatened the tenants. For T5, this could be a former tenant who had to move out of the rental unit because their landlord served them with an N12 or an N13 notice in bad faith. And then the T6 is, like I said earlier, about maintenance. So you inform the landlord about these maintenance issues, but they did nothing about it, or they took a really long time to fix them. Okay, and if you want to file a tenant application or help a tenant file an application, we have some links here where you can go. If you want to go directly to the Landlord and Tenant Board website, there is a portal you can join. You can also go to LTB offices. You can go to the legal clinic. These applications will probably run about $48 to $58, but if the tenant is low income, then they could request for a fee waiver so that that fee is covered.
Okay, next we'll talk about landlord applications. This is kind of the big one. We'll focus mostly on notices for eviction. We haven't included all of them here, but some of the most common ones are mentioned. A lot of tenants don't know this, but the eviction process is quite lengthy and it is geared to protect tenants. So once you receive, receiving a message from your landlord that they want to evict you is not sufficient. You do not have to leave your apartment or your home. The landlord has to follow very particular, very laid out steps as to, giving you notice that something is wrong, something needs to be fixed or repaired or paid back. They need to give you an opportunity to rectify it in most instances, not all. And then once that timeline has passed for you to fix or rectify, and if you haven't done it, then the landlord can apply to evict you. But some of the most common reasons that a landlord may apply to evict a tenant is non-payment of rent, interfering with others, damage or overcrowding. So that's like if you play really loud music at 4 a.m., if you damage something in the unit or in any common areas, and if there's too many people in your apartment, but there's a very specific calculation to determine overcrowding. If you committed any illegal acts or if you misrepresented your income in an RGI unit. So illegal acts, you don't necessarily need to be charged so long as they can prove there was illegal activity. So for example, the apartment may have been raided by police and they may have found illegal substances, but the police didn't lay a charge. You can still be evicted for that because it still represents illegal acts. Misrepresenting income in an RGI unit. RGI units are rent geared to income units where the unit rent is dictated by how much income you have. And if you misrepresented your income to, obtain or maintain a particular rent, you may be evicted for that. N8 is a more general notice and deterrent tenancy, but there still has to be specific reasons. And the most common use of an N8 is if a tenant regularly pays rent late. N12 is where the landlord or an immediate family member of the landlord or the purchaser wants to move in and occupy the unit. N13 is where the landlord wants to demolish or repair or convert it to another use. The N12 and N13, the threshold for landlords to do that is quite high. They have to be able to prove in good faith that they genuinely intend to live there for the better part of a year. Let me go next. So this is the eviction process. It is very lengthy. Quite a few steps. So the first step is the landlord must give you the notice. So I'll use the example of an N4. It's the most common one. If a tenant hasn't been paying rent or if they're behind on some rent, the landlord must serve them with an N4. The N4 says, hey, Mr. Tenant, you owe us a little bit of money. Can you please pay us back this money within 14 days? If that money is paid within 14 days, the eviction order is void and you can go on about your life as normal. If you haven't paid it off in 14 days, at that point, the landlord can then apply to the LTB and say, hey, LTB, this person isn't paying me rent. I gave them notice, I gave them time, and now I would like you to, preside over this matter in a hearing setting. The landlord will do that. And then directly from the LTB, the tenant will receive a notice that they are a party to the matter. That just means, hey, Mr. Tenant, your landlord has taken you to the LTB. Something is going to come up. Please keep an eye out for it. That can take weeks. It can take months. The LTB is notoriously backlogged. Following that, the tenant will also receive a notice of a hearing. So it'll have the hearing date, the time, how to access the hearing. It'll give tenants direction into how they can access additional resources, if they need to make an accommodation request, like a translator or a different method of communication. And then at the hearing itself, both parties are given the opportunity to present to the adjudicator, but there is also an opportunity for mediation. A lot of matters that get to the LTB are actually resolved by mediation. And mediation for these things can be, if the tenant owes some money, it can be agreeing to some type of payment plan. If the tenant is persistently late with rent, it can mean agreeing to pay rent on time and in full for the next year. If they were playing really loud music all the time, then they can agree to not play loud music anymore. And if the tenant breaches any of these agreements, then the landlord can still evict, but it gives the tenant a second opportunity to kind of fix any issues that may have persisted before that may have led to the hearing. If it isn't resolved in mediation, then it goes back to the hearing and you have your full hearing, both parties present to the adjudicator, and then a decision is made as to whether or not the tenant can remain in the unit. Sometimes adjudicators will give you a decision in the hearing itself. Sometimes it will be reserved and they will mail out the decision. Once the eviction order is received, there is usually a delay period in terms of, you can still pay off all of these arrears by this date, otherwise you'll be evicted. That time is standard, about 2 weeks. Sometimes it can be more depending on what was said at the hearing. Once that timeline has passed, at that point, the landlord can apply to the sheriff to have someone come out and supervise the changing of the locks. That process can take anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks. There's, again, no way to determine how long that will be. The sheriff is not legally obligated to notify the tenant when they will be coming, but they usually do. It's usually with a physical notice on their door, and it says, hey, Mr. Tenant, I'm going to be arriving on September 10th between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Please be ready to leave. The sheriff will arrive on the day with the landlord, and if the tenant is still in possession, they will help escort the tenant out of the unit. They will supervise the changing of the locks, and this is the only time that a landlord can change the locks without letting the tenant know first, without giving them a key right after. And then the tenant still has 72 hours to re-enter the unit to gather any belongings if necessary. And until this point, if whatever issue was outstanding is resolved, it can still void the eviction. So for example, if the issue was non-payment of rent and the rent owing was, $500, if you pay off that money, the eviction is completely void and you can maintain your tenancy. So it is quite long in terms of how long it takes for a landlord to evict someone. And just know that tenants don't have to leave until they are ordered to do so by the LTB.
Vicky and Sarah, this is David, just as a time check.
Okay,
Just a
I don't
few
think we have too much left.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll quickly skim over these slides. So when renting a new home, obviously you should view it in person. You can sign a lease agreement. You have to pay first month rent. Usually it's first and last. It shouldn't be more than that. And if your landlord asks for a key deposit, it can't be more than the value of a replacement. Just be aware of rental scams, which is when landlords ask for more than 1 month rent ahead of time to even view the unit. Okay, so some questions that can and can't be asked. So here are some examples of questions that can be asked. The landlord can ask you about your proof of income, but not the source. References, current address, first and last month rent. They cannot ask about race, religion, sexual orientation, immigration status, whether or not you're on social assistance like OW or ODSP, and if you plan on having children.
So landlord responsibilities are obviously very important, but so are tenant ones. And these are the things that if you fail to do, or if you do, will lead to possible notices of eviction. You have to pay your rent on time as it's due. You can't withhold it for any reason. You have to keep your unit in a clean and health standard. You have to repair any damage caused by you or your guests. And you have to allow access to the unit if the landlord requests it. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so for landlords, they have to maintain the unit in a good state of repair. They have to ensure compliance with any bylaws, safety codes, provide access to vital services, at least 24 hours written notice if they want to enter the unit, except for emergencies, provide written rent receipts if requested, follow provincial guidelines for rent increases unless there's an above guideline increase. They cannot lock out tenants, remove their belongings, shut off utilities, refuse maintenance and repairs once they've been alerted to them, and increase the rent more than once every 12 months. So with rent increases, tenants need to receive an N1 notice, and this needs to be served by the landlord at least 90 days before the date of the rent increase. And like I said earlier, they can only do this once per year, basically once every 12 months. As of 2026, the rent increase guideline in Ontario is 2.1%. So that's how much they can increase it by from the previous year. But this guideline doesn't apply to all units. So for example, if this unit was being used for residential purposes for the first time, November 15, 2018, it is not covered. If it is a unit that is shared with the landlord or another family member, then they're not a tenant of the RTA. Rent increases probably wouldn't apply. So these are things to keep in mind, and you can refer to the RTA if you have any questions about that.
Okay, I think this is our last slide. What happens when a lease ends? At the end of your term, you don't have to leave. Your lease automatically renews and becomes month to month. All of the previous terms still apply. At any time during a tenancy, the landlord and tenant can agree to terminate the lease. If either party wants to terminate after that, they must give appropriate notice. And as a special rule, N15, tenant can end at any time with 28 days notice if they fear for themselves or for any of their family members of sexual or domestic violence or abuse. And that can be served at any time. Oh, sorry, one more.
Oh, Becky, did you want to do this one or should I do it? Oh,
Happy to let you do it.
okay. So if you want to sublet or assign the unit, this isn't very common, but you do need to provide notice in writing to the landlord. There's a certain timeline you have to provide. The landlord, you need their consent, but they cannot unreasonably withhold that consent. And obviously, as a sublet tenant, you are equally responsible for maintaining the conditions of the unit. Okay, and then last thing are resources. So if you need more information or tips, there's Steps to Justice, Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, as well as the Community Legal Education for Ontario.
Steps to Justice and Clio are really good in terms of giving you guidance on how to fill in forms, what to do if you have questions, or if your landlord is doing something you suspect may be wrong. There's culturally specific clinics. These ones are for specific language or specific countries of origin. And then these are mostly catchment based. Your legal clinic is catchment based, so it's based on where you live. You have one legal clinic that you can go to. And then the other programs are Ontario wide. And then this is for if you or your fellow tenants want to organize and form a union or anything like that. And then this is just information, not advice.
Thank you.